Hello and welcome back to our study of ministry to God through continual worship and prayer. I want to dive deeper into the nature of God's love. We've talked about how God is love, but this is so essential to understanding the concept of ministry to God that I want to take some time to unpack the nature of God's love today. Now, I'm going to read through some of my material and Bible verses on this subject, and as I continue, I want to encourage you to give me your feedback. I would love to hear from you so that we can grow together in our understanding of this topic. You can email me at logan@arkansasforchrist.org or through our contact page on our website, or comment on our social media posts about this podcast. I would love to hear from you. So let's dive deeper into the nature of God's love. Only the reception of love from God produces uninhibited love for God. Pure, fearless, and sacrificial love is God's nature. The nature of love is the instilled result of personal and corporate encounter with God. The ability to give love to God corresponds to the ability to receive love from God. Greater reception of God's love produces greater expression of love to God. It's impossible to rightly give love to God without first receiving His love. Every fruitful ministry is ultimately a response to the revelation of God's love. Now, that's not to say we can't go through the motions of giving our love to God, but for us to truly, from a place of our hearts, give love to God means that we need to receive His love for us. Look at 1 John chapter 4, verse 19. This gives us the framework for how we understand our love and God's love. It says, we love because God first loved us. We love because God first loved us. And then a prayer of the Apostle Paul to the Philippians in chapter 1, verses 9 through 11. Paul prays, "It is my prayer that your love may abound more and more with knowledge and all discernment, so that you would approve what is excellent and be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God." Now notice, Paul didn't pray that they would just approve what is excellent or be pure and blameless or be fruitful in ministry. Paul prayed that they would abound in love, because that is the key to fruitful ministry, to approving what is excellent, to living pure and blameless for the day of Christ, abounding in the love of God and abounding in love for one another. It sounds very familiar to what we talked about previously. And then look at the teachings of Jesus in John chapter 15. It's that beautiful passage of abiding in Jesus' love. Just listen to these words. I'm going to skim through some parts of this. "Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, and you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you." Now, this is such a beautiful passage, but it poses a constant challenge and question over our lives. What does it look like to abide in God's love? What does it look like for me as a husband and a father, or at my church or my ministry or at my workplace? What does it look like for me to abide in God's love? How do I love God with my time, with my family, with my resources? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. What does that actually look like? This is a question we need to ask the Holy Spirit and invite the Lord to show us how we love him with our resources, how we love him with our time, and then begin to seek deeper, pursue greater expressions of abiding in God's love. It's such a beautiful picture. I love reviewing this and just praying and inviting the Lord to speak to me about what that looks like. Now let's dive a little bit deeper. God is infinite and unsearchable love. A love of such greatness bears equal capacity for reciprocal expression. There's no amount of derivative love that could satisfy the worth of God. No potential expression of all creation that could produce an adequate response. Creation is but a drop amid the shoreless ocean of the Creator's love. Unimaginable is the prospect of an overemphasized or exaggerated display of love to God, the expanse of eternity accounted. Look at Psalm chapter 145, verses 1 through 3. I will extol you, my God and King, and bless your name forever and ever. Every day I will bless you and praise your name forever and ever. For great is the Lord and greatly to be praised. His greatness is unsearchable. How amazing. What a beautiful picture and way to describe the love of God as unsearchable and infinite. And to understand for a moment that because God's love toward us is infinite, that means our potential response of love for God is also infinite. This is what makes eternity so exciting, because we could literally spend eternity exploring the unsearchable depths of God's love and expressing the unsearchable depths of love back to God. It's such a beautiful picture, something to be so excited about. And it just baffles my mind when you take a moment to think about what we have access to in the infinite love of God and what this means for humanity and for creation. It's beautiful. And I've noticed a trend. Sometimes you'll notice this. It kind of goes back to Paul's prayer for love to abound. I've noticed that in ministries or in people or churches where they have a rich understanding of the love of God, their worship is more vibrant. Their prayers are more fervent. They have larger expressions of love for God because they have a richer understanding of the love of God for them. And that there should never be an expression of love for God that we could ever deem as too radical or over-exaggerated or over-extravagant. Sometimes we may be tempted to compare ourselves with someone else or look to another church or another ministry or another life and imagine that they're too radical in their expression of love for God or over-exaggerated. Now, I understand there's a need for maturity, but just on a base level, even imagining a ministry like the International House of Prayer in Kansas City that's been regarded as over-exaggerated and extravagant in their expression of 24/7 worship and prayer as a little bit much. But if you imagine the infinite worth of Jesus to be worshiped and the infinite capacity of our love for God, I mean, it's just a drop in the bucket of what Jesus is worth. There's no potential expression of love for God that could ever be deemed as over-exaggerated compared to the worth of God to be loved. And that's just something I have to remind myself of, that he's worthy of so much more than I could ever give him. He's worthy of more than 24/7. He'd be worthy of 25/8 and any amount of strength that we could ever give. And it's interesting how sometimes as a society, even as a church, we can so easily justify the expense and the manpower and energy that has to be given to certain expressions of outward ministry, but we can find it difficult and call into question the justification of expressions of love for God. Even as a society, we can very rightly justify 24/7 hospitals, 24/7 McDonald's, 24/7 Walmart, especially here in Arkansas, 24/7 pharmacies. And, it's like, if I can't go get my coffee at 3:00 in the morning, I don't know what I'm going to do. But then we call into question when somebody calls the church to 24/7 worship and prayer, that could somehow be an exaggeration when truly it's just a drop in the bucket. It's such a limited measure of what God is actually worth. That should be something we could so easily and quickly justify, because there's no amount of resource we could spend or manpower we could spend that could ever satisfy the worth of God to be praised, the worth of God to receive our love from every hour, every day, for the rest of eternity. It's so immeasurable. So that's something that I ponder and I think about as I'm talking about this subject. We could look also at Psalm 103, verse 11, another great picture of God's love. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his steadfast love toward those who fear him. I don't know if you've ever actually looked at the measurements. The distance from the earth to the sun, and the earth to the nearest star past the sun, or to the center of the Milky Way galaxy, or the space between galaxies, we're dealing with great magnitudes of measurement. And here the psalmist says, for as high as the heavens are above the earth, So great is his steadfast love toward those who fear him. It's such a beautiful picture of God's love. As the Psalms repeatedly declare, the love of God is steadfast and unchanging. The immutability of God, which is just a fancy term for his unchanging character, the immutability of God resolves that his love is fully expressed at every instance. It's impossible for a nanosecond to pass where the love of God is not expressed in absolute fullness. Equally impossible it should be for the people of God to settle for anything less than the fullest reception of love from God and the fullest expression of love to God. Look at this prayer from the Apostle Paul now in Ephesians chapter 3, verses 16 through 19. That according to the riches of his glory, not according to anybody else's strength, but according to God's riches, may God grant you to be strengthened with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you may be rooted and grounded in love, that you may have strength to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, and that you may be filled with the fullness of God. Again, not settling for less, but filled with the fullness, that we would be living in a pursuit of the fullness of God, the fullness of everything he would give to us, the love that we could experience, and the love that we could express to him and to the world. What a beautiful prayer. I pray this prayer pretty continually for myself, my family, my church. It's such a beautiful prayer. Too often are the people of God found settling for less than the fullness of God. Recognizing the inadequacy of humanity, God provided a way by which his people could be redeemed and creation restored by the reception and expression of divine love. This is humanity's participation in the triune nature and the basis of ministry to God. If you think about the type of relationship between the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, they experience the perfect reception and expression of love. This is the kind of relationship that we are called into, that perfect expression and reception of love, and then to set that example for the rest of humanity. It's a beautiful picture of what we get to experience in the love of Jesus, and then what we get to express back to him through our love. It's such a beautiful calling that should challenge us to be something we strive for the rest of our days. It's a beautiful thing. So this wraps up this segment. We're kind of coming to a close on the introduction segment of Ministry to God, and we're going to begin to dive into some more of the specifics about the biblical history, the modern history, the examples, what this really looks like in the coming weeks. So I'm excited to get even deeper into this. I hope you are too. I would love to hear from you. Don't forget to send me your comments, your questions, your thoughts. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch or to listen, and I'll talk to you again soon.